Welcome back. Well, is it helpful or hurtful for gay writers to have their sexuality publicly known? That's the topic of our today's Q segment, and here is reporter Donald Dehaney with a look at one successful writer based right here in London.
Writer Emma Donoghue's works have been called a smorgasbord of wry, robust, and extraordinary works. I wonder if her being a lesbian has contributed to her success.
I think being a lesbian was a factor in the early days, in that it got me a little bit of attention right at the start when I was publishing my first novel. And it helped that this was in the early 90s when, it was the beginning of all that, lesbian chic and all that, more of a novelty factor. So it probably helped me stand out a bit from the huge mob of first-time novelists. But I can't say it's been any major advantage through the last 10 years. And I'm sure it's lost me some readers and some commissions. So it's very hard to tell. But I think it probably helped initially to, mark me out in some way. Well, I call myself a writer, but, in certain contexts, I'll be called an Irish writer. I'm often called a woman writer. I'm often called a lesbian writer. I couldn't care less, really. Often the reason you're being labelled is that your work is being discussed in a particular context, like in a magazine on queer literature or a conference on Irish literature. So it makes sense for these identities to be debated about you. So I don't find any of them burdensome, and I can't stand it when writers, in the press, refuse to be called gay or refuse to be called whatever they are, because it sounds so much as if they're ashamed, I figure I'm from Ireland, I happen to be a lesbian, these are just facts about me. But I wouldn't let anyone tell me that my work has to correspond to these labels. I think it does tend to be in big cities that you get a clearly defined queer writing community, yeah. And I suppose there wouldn't be all that many writers in London. I mean, there's a handful of famous names like Joan Barfoot and Bonnie Bernard, but it's not a huge writing centre. We don't all get together in cafes and drink absinthe, I've always found that it's an enormous help to be completely out about it, because you deal with all those questions at the start and then you get on with talking about the books. Whereas writers who are coy about it or who resist being asked about their sexuality, it actually takes on a huge significance. It's like an elephant in the dining room. It's distracting because they won't address the issue. Whereas I found that with my very first book, I gave endless interviews about being a lesbian, and then I was able to slightly get past that and feel that there were no secrets. So it is very liberating. My novel Life Mask just came out in paperback, and this is a big book about the rich and glamorous in London, England in the 1790s. And I really had fun with this one because it's about a kind of a queer love triangle in that basically an actress was being competed for by a male aristocrat and a female sculptor. But it's this very tense little triangle of friends, and they were very famous each in their own area of theatre, sport, politics, and art. And so it was a way of looking at this whole glittering, quarrelsome society through three very interesting but now long forgotten individuals. I think for most writers there's autobiographical material in what they write, but it's not always obvious. For instance, when I write historical novels, they're about the past and they're about real events, but often I put in a lot of my own feelings. For instance, my last novel, Life Mask, was about a sculptor, and I've never done sculpture, but I put in a lot of thoughts on the artistic process, on her struggles with her art, that are really based on what I think about writing. So that's an example of where life material gets really transformed in the writing. And when I'm writing contemporary material, I sometimes use things I've lived through, but I often use things my friends have lived through. I mean, I'll shamelessly borrow, beg, and steal from the lives of my friends.
For Emma Donoghue, being a lesbian has had its advantages, generating considerable publicity for her novels, something she says no writer should take for granted. I'm Donald Dehaney for Today's Londoner.
Well, he's our Today's Q reporter, but now he joins me in studio wearing another hat. This is author Donald Dehaney. Welcome, Donald.
Thanks for having me.
We finally get to meet you.
Finally.
You're in studio with us.
Yes, you look great in person.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, you have written a book, and this is your book. So you're also an author, reporter for us, and an author on your own time.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. This is my second edition. I revamped it, added some information.
Okay.
It's my autobiography.
Uh-huh. Now, being a gay writer, do you think that you really connect with the gay community? How do you influence the gay community with your writing?
Well, that's interesting. I asked a heterosexual writer on the weekend who works for the Free Press, do you feel that you're part of the heterosexual community? And he said, no. And the truth is that the gay community isn't like the Italian community, isn't like those communities. We don't have one place where we all go. If you lowball the percentage of gays in London, it's like between 10 and 15,000.
Yeah.
And we all don't go to one place. I mean, so we're like everybody. We're today's Londoner.
Yeah.
We're like all kinds of different kinds of people. So
You just mixed all in.
that's right. So I don't feel a part of a community. I just represent myself. So when I write about gay issues, I just represent Donald.
Okay. How has the community responded in general? The community responded in general to your book.
Well,
Have they liked it?
I got a story. Well,
Okay.
about my first writing when I wrote my first gay article for the Free Press. A family relative said, "You're not going to write that. They're going to know you're one of them. They're homosexuals, eh?" And actually, she was right, because with my second article, I was excommunicated from my church, which was just a shocking kind of experience. And what I wrote about was a comical piece, comparing my friend who wasn't into gay pride and I was, just comparing our two different points of view. And I hadn't even been to a gay pride in London.
Really?
I was writing about it, and I got booted out of my church for that. So quite a reaction. But since then, I would say that the heterosexual community has been wonderfully responding to my writing.
Right.
It's been a great response.
Do you find that you're labeled a lot now that you've kind of publicly said, I'm gay, and here's my writing, and here's my book, and comment on this?
No kidding. I mean, I go to the bank, and a teller goes, "How was Pride?" And they always assume that if you're one person representing, if you write, that you represent all the gay community, and you know all the new stuff in on the gay community, and I don't, and I don't pretend to.
Right. Now, you haven't just wrote a book. You used to be the publisher of Q magazine that was out for a little while.
Right.
So how was your experience doing that?
It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And our last issue was our most successful. It was a very successful magazine. I would say that, like my book, I end with a cliffhanger. So I am actually now living part two of my memoirs. And Q will make an interesting chapter in my book, I'm sure. I'll say that.
So, because your book is not fiction.
No.
This is fact, and this book is all about you. And you really write it in a way that people, it's very conversational. People understand it. It's very easy to follow, and it's enjoyable to read.
Thank you.
So is it hard to get all the facts together and get everything straight? And do you offend people at all when you write about your life and include others in there?
Good question.
Yeah.
What I do is I have a lawyer go through everything I ever do, and I make sure that it's totally factual. In fact, I change the names because the point of the book isn't to revenge or point fingers. It's to tell a story. The story is the point, and by doing that, you universalize the story. But I should say that I think that more writers should check their facts, because something was written about me, mentioning me recently, never called me to check the facts, and so when someone read to me what this was, it was laughable, hysterical. It has nothing to do with my experience. And how can you editorialize about someone else's life without talking to that person? So it's quite interesting.
So you're really careful when you do all this.
I am very careful.
That's great. And finally, how can people get your book? This is the second edition, so the first one has already been out.
Right.
But how can they get it? Can we hold that up again?
I'm telling you, like hotcakes it goes.
Really?
This was FedExed to me an hour ago because I'm all out of the books from the U.S.
Really?
Those are my publishers.
Wow.
So 2 places, Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and my website, in which you can find out information about the book, reviews, and order the book, and it's cheaper there too, by the way. So it's fatherstouch.com, www.fatherstouch.com.
Great. And you're right here in London?
Yes.
A London author.
Thank you so much.
Great for being here. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you doing your reporting next week.
Thanks for the great questions.
Okay. Well, right after this, we'll find out the importance